Get to that's
Tom Shepstone. I'm with the Shepstone Management Corporation, and also I publish a blog called NaturalGasNow.org.
outstanding. Thank you for joining the program here today. And I do want to ask you about Trump's speech at the World Economic Forum. I want to get your take on that. But first of all, we do this on the podcast. We do a headlines segment, and it wouldn't surprise me if we got a headline from Natural Gas Now from time to time in there. So tell us a little bit about Natural Gas Now, what it is you do, and how you're relevant in the world of oil and gas.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Well, what we do is we advocate for natural gas development, particularly in rural areas where it typically occurs. And I'm a planner by trade. I do a lot of work with communities and also people in the development business, and have an agricultural background as well. And I know how important it is for rural economies to have something going on that generates some ability to pay the taxes on land. And that's one of the things that natural gas does very well. It allows you to generate a return on your investment in land, and therefore it helps you to stay in farming and to stay living on the land that perhaps you grew up on. It's very good for the rural soul, so to speak, and the rural economy, and it preserves a lot of open space in the process. So that's how I became an advocate for it. And Natural Gas Now is a blog where I collect the opinions of a lot of people, including some of your work. And I've also put a lot of my own effort into it in analyzing things, bringing up stories, letting people know what's going on. And my primary purpose in doing that is to motivate people to do something, to try to get them to be knowledgeable enough that when they get into a debate with somebody who thinks fossil fuel use is a threat, that they can respond accordingly, and they can say, hey, fracking's not a is not a problem environmentally. It's actually saving open space, for example. And we have a great track record. I want them to be able to know enough to argue back in a civil fashion, and that's what we try to do. We try to motivate and educate people at the same time for purposes of advocating for natural gas development. And I get some support from the industry. I get some support from landowners, um, but primarily we're focused on that whole motivation element. And our slogan is, about for the for rural economies, for the land, and for the environment. So that's what we're all about.
And sometimes there's some politics, other times there's regulation, and sometimes it's just a straight out did you know or informative. I was looking at your website the other day, and I know you have guest bloggers, and they did a pretty nice little quick article on difference between wet dry and wet gas, dry
Yeah.
gas and wet gas, which there is a significant difference.
Oh yeah. And I'm very proud of our guest bloggers. We have a lot of them, and some of them are just ordinary landowner types who want to say what they think, and they're pretty good at saying it. And so we do that. We also have some retired people who've had some real special expertise with regard to things like the carbon trading and things like that, and we are privileged to be able to view some of their material. We have a relationship with the Institute for Energy Research, which allows us to use their material, and we have similar arrangements with other people, including in the industry and out of it, to be able to put it all together and combine it with my opinions and my own personal knowledge from being 60 some years old and having learned a couple of things along the way. So
Now, where are you based out of geographically?
Honesdale, Pennsylvania. Now Honesdale is in the very northeastern corner of Pennsylvania. So we are the county that I'm in, Wayne County, is bounded on the north and on the east by the Empire State, or as I like to refer to it as the Emperor State, because the we have a guy who fancies himself as an emperor, as the governor over there. Um, but we're right in the Northeast, and we're the only county in Pennsylvania that actually has viable, marketable natural gas that can't develop it, because we happen to be in the Delaware River Basin, which is regulated by a group called the Delaware River Basin Commission, or DRBC. And even though they're mostly the same people who are on the Susquehanna River Basin Commission on the other side of the mountain, where they have done all kinds of natural gas development, when they put their DRBC hats on, they say, no, we think it's a big threat. And that's one of the dichotomies that we're trying to constantly expose and to challenge.
What's going on with Pennsylvania's energy? I know that you follow outside of Pennsylvania, but I believe it. Didn't I see an article that there was going to be some considerable fee increases or some restrictions, or some people were going to try the public health debate to make life more difficult for oil and gas companies? Yeah. Is that happening? Yeah. Did I see that?
It is happening, but I think some people read a little too much into that. Yes, they're proposing a gigantic fee, increase, but the fees aren't that huge to begin with. I mean, they're a few $1,000s or something. And in the big picture, they're not a significant element. It's more of a harassment issue than anything else. I don't think it's going to disincentivize anybody from drilling a gas well.
No, you're right. I'm looking at this news story right now, and it says we'll rise, say, from 5,000 to 12,500.
Yeah,
that's a drop in the bucket too. That's a pretty good lunch for some companies.
Yeah, I know some of my exactly. Some of my colleagues are talking about that and making a big deal about it, and I understand why, because they know it's a harassment and they want to challenge it. But I kind of think I have more important things to do than worry about those fees. And Pennsylvania, we have a Democrat governor right now who I think has done a terrible job leading the state, but he's not terribly effective. Okay, so we have a Republican legislature who is pro-energy, and behind the scenes, he's more pro-energy than he would let people believe, which I think is true. Several Democrats, that there's some of them are, they want to keep their allies in the fractivist side of things, and the green sort of street cred, but they understand deep down, and they don't want to lose their economies, and they want to keep things rolling along too.
Sure.
So I think that's what's happening in Pennsylvania. Now New York is a different case. New York is so far gone over the edge. I'm not sure even Johnny Green can save them. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure either if the greatest environmentalist on earth, the Earth champion, could even save New York where they're at. Man, I tell you.
I have the highest respect for that guy, but I don't think he could save New York. So.
He's by the way, I'm hearing rumblings that Johnny Green will be putting the title on the line in June. The belt is going to be on the line for the greatest environmentalist on the planet, and more details to come on that for sure. But
I'll be watching for that. Trust me. So.
I did see it was an op-ed that came out of Pennsylvania, out of one of the papers. It might have been Harrisburg over the weekend. That was just going along the whole public health. Politicians and oil and gas. So I that's what it was. It was the war drums that I saw beaten there. And so anyway, I think 2020 is going to be one heck of a year politically. I really do.
Oh my goodness. I think it's going to be fascinating to see
for oil and gas. That is for oil and gas.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether Trump takes Pennsylvania again, because he's making a play for it again, of course, as he should, and he's doing it on the basis of what he's done in energy, and I think that's going to resonate well in Western Pennsylvania, and certainly in the rural parts of the county, or the Commonwealth. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a good year in that respect. So we'll see.
How about his speech, Trump's speech at the World Economic Forum? I know that you had some writings up on that and have some opinions on that. Talk to the listeners out there how Trump's speech out at the World Economic Forums impacts the energy industry.
think it has a tremendous impact because what he's doing, and I reprinted the whole speech on my site and added a few comments, but I think it's tremendous because when he's going over to this World Economic Forum, which has really been a gather over the last numerous years. It's been a gathering of kind of effete snobs from Europe, and they sit around and talk to each other, and fly in on their big jets and all this stuff, and opine on all kinds of politically correct things. And Trump has gone in there and he's just delivered a very straightforward message saying, we're the leader of the world, not you guys, in so many words, and we're getting it done, and we're getting it done in a very straightforward way by cutting regulations, by promoting our natural gas and oil, and allowing it to do its thing. We are redoing our trade deals to make it more fair, and from the energy perspective, he's also trying to do things about like these pipeline delays and some of that. And I love the way he said it. He said, we are not going to be, I'm paraphrasing now, we're not going to be prophets of doom anymore. Not in America. We're looking forward. We're making things happen. We've went through these repeated scares about having population bomb, and all this kind of nonsense. We've had global cooling in the past, all that nonsense. And he's saying, don't pay any attention to that. We've got our eye on the ball. We're moving forward. America is great. We're the leader, and you can do it too. That's what he's saying. And I loved it. And I thought it was brilliantly done. And, he's an interesting character. I wasn't for him in 2016 and during the primaries. But, boy, he sure proved himself with me, and I think he's proved himself with a lot of people. And,
I think people forget that really you only have two choices. And you might have three, but really you only have two choices. And what I used to tell people is, look, maybe some people are just afraid of their insurance premiums going up. And maybe they're afraid of losing their job in the energy sector, so that's why they support Trump. Maybe it's not all the other reasons that the media says he's the most hated man on the planet for, which, by the way, he continues to win elections and polls and gets support, so he can't be that hated.
That's right.
That's the part that blows me away, and that's where he's right about the narrative. You work in the media, that there can be a very good effort for a narrative to be created if you have control over a certain amount of resources.
Yeah, it's a very unusual person who can crack through all this stuff, and you have to be somebody who talks differently. You've got to be somebody with a self-confidence to the point of it being a point perhaps in certain circumstances, but you have to have that. You have to have that ability to talk differently, to talk plainly, to be self-confident, to proclaim loudly, and to be unapologetic. And I think that the unapologetic part is perhaps the most important.
I would agree. That's probably been his biggest strength, actually, up to date, is his ability to be unapologetic, which a lot of people would say is his biggest weakness. It makes him, an awful person and yada, yada. But in order to do the things he's been able to do, I think you're right. He's almost had to be unapologetic.
There's no question. And, and we have to separate what the duties of a president are and a leader are from what our duties are as individuals, and as individuals, of course, we have the moral obligation to be apologetic from time to time, but not when you're a leader, okay? Not when you're the guy responsible for turning things around, when you're the guy that has to get things done. And let's be honest, when he's run into a brick wall from time to time, he's adjusted, he's backed up, he's adjusted, he's gone a different direction when he's needed to, but he doesn't do that by saying, I'm sorry, we should have never done that, or it's got to do better. He never does that. I love it.
When you mentioned that, I was thinking about, even when he eats humble pie, he's dropping F-bombs, talking about, I wish I would have never supported the F and vaping. And I just saw that headline, and I just, I thought, here's even when he was trying to put his heart in the right place, he still ends up in top headlines for
Yeah,
sensational
yeah, yeah.
news, and it's just you can't make it up. I mean, it's
No, I know. I
oh
know.
yeah, it's like the great prophet George Carlin said, "America's a
Yeah.
freak show. Sit down and enjoy the front row seat, folks." And so, anyway, but hey, you mentioned pipeline delays, and I was talking with someone about how it seemed like after the DAPL pipeline protest in North Dakota, Standing Rock is really when the template got perfected to where other pipeline protests seem to really just
Yeah.
no problem. So I don't know if you agree with that or if the timing on that was about the same, but talk to me a little bit about the pipeline protest because I do think we're gonna see some this year, and I think it's a critical year because we need to get pipelines to Corpus Christi and Lake Charles, and Mexico wants some LNG. You know what I mean? There's a reason to get these pipelines done sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And I do think the other side has really figured out how to make a scene about some of these things and to create pressure with a very few people. And one of the problems we face, though, I think, is less so them than it is the pipeline industry itself, and even more importantly, the people it feeds. And I'll give you an example. I'm not going to mention the specific company or the specific pipeline, but I'm aware of a pipeline that was enormously controversial, and the project was such that one of the companies that was going to receive this gas took a hard line and said, "Hey, we must have this gas," and really went all out on it and started turning off, or not turning off gas, but saying we can't do new connections until we have assurance we're going to have the gas we need. And they were winning that battle, winning it big time. And I think on the cusp of getting an approval of their pipeline, and then all of a sudden, that company loses heart and says, "Oh, the heck with it. We're not. It's not that important to us." And the reason and then of course they lost the battle. So the why did they give up so quickly at the very end when they were on the cusp? Well, the reason is that so many of these companies can turn around and charge the consumer for their mistakes. I mean, this is one of the problems we have, is that a utility company that is providing you electric service or gas service or whatever it may be, they're under some kind of edict from the state that is totally uneconomical, totally bizarre, makes no sense whatsoever, like subsidizing crazy wind projects that only work 25% of the time, and we're putting massive subsidies into them, and they can just say, well, we know it's stupid, but we're going to sign on to it anyway, because you taxpayers are going to pay the bill, or you consumers are going to pay the bill, one of the two or both, more than likely. And therefore, what do we got to lose? Because we're a regulated company, and we can, at the end of the day, if we have additional costs, if things go wrong, it's all going to fall back on you guys anyway. So what the heck? We'll just go along. Why fight for rationality? Why fight for common sense? Let's just go along, go with the flow, and we'll pass the bill on to the consumer and the taxpayer. And that's the real battle we're facing. The environmentalists are just taking advantage of that. So they're making the fuss that the utility company can then use as an excuse to cave. That's how I see it.
I think they've got a lot of different arrows in their quiver of tactics, and you mentioned a couple. I mentioned a couple, and I think a lot of it too, and is just hemorrhaging companies out, making them bleed financially, so that they either got to sell or close the project or move on to something else.
Yeah, it's a constant battle. Now it's more of a battle in some places than others. I don't think, for example, building pipelines in Ohio is that difficult. And I don't even think building them in Pennsylvania is all that difficult. I mean, yes, there's been some challenges and so on, but
It is rather interesting, though, that after the Dakota Access Pipeline Standing
yeah,
Rock, it sure seemed like, boy, you could just download a checklist
yeah,
off the internet for any protester, huh?
yeah,
It was,
yeah. I agree with that, but you had the problem you have is the Native American excuse. And it's not that I'm not sympathetic to tribes and Native Americans. I've done some work for some of the tribes, but the but it's a unique problem that you have out there, and that we had with DAPL, that created an additional vulnerability that doesn't exist everywhere. What we have and what we have in like New York and Maryland and New Jersey and places like that is we're just dealing again with very rich elites who don't care whether the rest of the people get gas or not, or get oil, whatever the case may be.
the one thing
And so,
about DAPL that I thought was so interesting, and what you just brought up, and I'd like to elaborate on, is it really exposed a lot of the emotional elements that people
oh yeah,
people didn't have before. I mean, when you really look at it,
yeah,
there were rubber bullets fired and water in sub-zero temperatures. Hollywood
yeah,
showed up. Disabled veterans showed up.
yeah,
I had texts and phone calls from 7 countries and 3 continents
isn't that amazing?
about what was going on because it was in my backyard. Well, I was on the BBC. I mean, I was the reporter
Wow,
that they
wow,
interviewed about it. So I was somewhat finding things out. But that's what I took away from it was. Somebody said to me that was actually the biggest PR black eye on oil and gas since the BP oil spill because of the way that the state handled it.
yeah. The interesting thing about that one of the interesting sidelights is Nathan Phillips, of course, was out there making noise out there in your neck of the woods, and lo and behold, he becomes famous later, creating that phony attack on or phony incident with Nick Sandman, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of is very revealing, I think, as to some of the dynamics at play here. We've got an
Well,
irresponsible media. You've got a lot of emotional stuff. You've got people with agendas all over the place. But the interesting thing about the DAPL was it didn't only motivate people from the other side. It also motivated people from our side. I mean, when I ran stories on DAPL, even though I'm more Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York focused, New Jersey, um, people, boy, they responded to that. I mean,
I'll
we
tell
had
you,
a
I learned a lot about. I knew an adequate amount about pipelines, but when that happened, I of course went on overdrive and learned a lot. I
sure,
was surprised at how much I learned in favor of the energy industry. Like every
yeah,
time I go in and actually do some investigation, it always turns out that the energy industry seems to be a lot more on the right side than on the wrong side. And I'm
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm and I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not,
yeah,
no, this is actually if you go in and look at the facts and science, etc. And
right,
that was the it was just so different the way that all that was handled out there. And like I said, it really brought out the emotional elements. And that's that story I asked you about earlier. I wanted to circle back to that editorial about out in Pennsylvania. And I found it. It's actually from Washington County, an old newspaper I used to do. I had newspaper clients back in my former publishing days. And Washington County was one of them, just south of Pittsburgh,
right,
correct?
right,
Okay, so we're
that's correct.
just south of Pittsburgh, and it's an editorial asking for the Department of Health to rethink public health by regulating oil and gas more, and they're using like childhood cancer. And
Yeah, I know.
when I saw that, I went, "Oh, this is a whole." And so my question to you is, I think this is actually we got to start having this discussion now because it's going to be too late. Which is, I firmly believe that the activists are having a public health debate and the energy industry is still trying to have an energy debate. What's your thought on that?
I think that's right, and it's been coming for quite some time. I mean, that's the issue that ultimately New York used to ban fracking and may permanently ban it at this point. From what we're hearing, they may make a move to do that. And there's no evidence. I mean, that whole thing with in Pittsburgh is uh, it's just nonsense. I mean, when you read up on it, study the details of it, it's absolute nonsense. The state itself has, gone over it and indicated they see no evidence of any pattern or anything else, and yet they were forced to turn around and they're spending $3 million of our tax money to study it again, to do a special study, which of course is going to conclude the exact same thing. Because it's going to use the same data, so.
Did your state experience a smoking ban, through public restaurants and that sort of thing? Did you guys have a statewide referendum on that?
Yes.
So we did too. And about 5 years ago, when I was out in Colorado, I started noticing the way that people were acting out there, and it was very similar to what I thought was the smoking ban in up in my neck of the woods, up in the upper Midwest here. Pretty much every state has done it. And they did the same thing where when you look at secondhand smoke, the science has really actually never been concluded as accurate by the actual, CDC and WHO and everything else. It's actually never been concluded, but it got the Mandela effect so much, it got so much momentum, they were able to just sweep through and do it. Now, is it better or worse? That's not even the discussion here. The discussion is it was loose science that was never verified, and then they took and they ran with it. That's the same template I'm seeing here today.
There's no question about it. There's a book, I'm looking at it on my shelf right now as we're speaking. It's a book called Scare Pollution by Steve Malloy. And he focuses on this whole secondhand smoke thing. I would encourage anybody that's interested in it to read it because it does show you what's about it. He appropriately titles the book "Scare Pollution," and of course he's just using that as one example. And I don't want to get into defending it one way or another. But you're right. The science has never ever been proven, and yet we made policy on it. We made legislation affecting everybody on it, and when we see that repeatedly, but at a certain point, I think everything is a pendulum. The pendulum does swing the other way from time to time, and I do think once people, you can envision a situation, 5 years from now when people realize that we've made a lot of mistakes, we've gone too far in one direction. You can visualize them coming back, and that's kind of what Trump is doing in many areas now. But I do, I'm old enough to have seen that kind of thing various times. That the pendulum swings, and there's an overreaction, and then there's a reaction to the overreaction. So.
Yeah, it is just a little concerning when you've got presidential candidates talking about banning the industry. My question is, well, what happened to straws? We decided to give up on straws, and so we're just going to do the whole industry.
It's crazy.
It is. I mean, it's quite remarkable, really. And I just don't understand how the media continues to give. Like honestly, when I look at Elizabeth Warren, and I'm not trying to be political here, I'm just trying to say, if you took any person that knew anything about the way a light economy and just the way of duties and responsibilities in a civilization works, and you said to them, we're going to ban your number one energy source that actually produces the most amount of jobs, and then we're also going to wipe out student debt. So we're going to get rid of that, and we're going to get. I mean, the only way to make that happen
Medicare
is
for all. Don't forget that Medicare for all,
and Medicare for all. I mean, I look at it and I'm going, those are some like major overhauls that you just say, okay, America, this is the way that we now do things because nothing is the same anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's crazy. I just don't get how the media continues to give her attention.
I don't either, but I do think the general public understands, at least some do, and I think enough do, that we're safe for a while on that. But you do have to worry about the future when people think that disastrously. And the worst part of it is, she's not stupid. She's a smart lady in her own sense. She is doing something she knows, she has to know, is wrong. She is demagoguing, and this is what I see in New York, across the river. But you see people who know have to know that this is completely wrong, that this is bizarre, that this makes no sense, and yet they're doing it anyway for the short-term, political gain. And I think that's the nub of the problem in many respects, is that we've got people who don't even make a pretense toward rationality. I mean, they're willing to sacrifice everything to demagogues.
Again, we can go back to the great prophet George Carlin, who was very, very famous for coming out and saying F Tiger Woods and Lance Armstrong. And that was when everybody loved those two. They were untouchable. And he was right on them too. And I almost look at it the same way, where it seems to, like, a lot of times we like to prop people up that they just like to say platitudes. Just whoever can say the coolest platitude in the moment, we're going to prop up. It doesn't matter what's behind it. They can, like you mentioned, they can fly these big expensive jets together to talk about how to save the climate.
Yeah, exactly. It's maddening. But that's what to get back to Trump a little bit. That's what I kind of like about it. He cuts through all that. And not many people can do that. I was again during the 2016 thing. Ted Cruz was my guy. I still like him. I think he's a great guy. But I don't know. As smart as he is, and he's an extremely bright guy. As smart as he is, and as capable he is in debates and all that kind of thing, could he have cut through some of this the way that Donald Trump is? I don't think so. I don't think he
No,
could.
I don't think anybody can. You see, Trump's not a politician, and and I don't know if I've ever told you my theory on politics is pro wrestling, and instead of arm bars and headlocks, they use bullet points and sound bites for education and gun control. But they know what they're going to say, so it's a contrived dance, just like wrestling is. And Trump. Hey, Trump has headlined WrestleMania 22, and he also has hosted it twice, so that's why he's ahead of the game. And and there's a little bit of truth behind what I'm saying, because he is ahead of the media. He knows how to work it better than anyone. And honestly, if you look at the way that a lot of the politics is these days, some guy from CNN will bring in, okay, we're going to talk gun control. Here's Joe Schnaub from the right party, and here's Jane Schneeb from the left party. We have no idea who they are, but because they represent the red and the blue, we listen to them. And Trump knows that. And he's like, nah, that's okay. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Well, the first, you're absolutely right. The first clue that he was going to be different was that during the 2016 debates, he did, how they usually do preparation. They have somebody stand in and pretend to be the other candidate. They drill him on questions, and he, from what I read, he did very little preparation. He just stood up and he was just himself. And look how it came through. He was.
Donald Trump said one of the worst words that you could possibly say about a female's body part, and also made fun of a man's genitalia, and is the president of the United States. He can do anything he wants. I mean, are you kidding me? I would if he did that and got elected, anything could. I mean, and
exactly.
Anyway, I did want to just kind of wrap up here about natural gas. Just kind of plug in your site, of course, NaturalGasNow, but also. Really, I do think the reality of it, when you take away the scare tactics and everything along those lines, the industry is probably going to go through a little bit of a change. But natural gas seems to be the safe bet for the next 30 years, by pipelines, by abundance of supply, by they say it's a bridge fuel. I say it's more of a foundation fuel.
That's right. I love that term. And the reason for that is that you can't do renewables. And renewables are going to grow, and if for no other reason than political correctness, we're going to see more of it. And they are going to get somewhat better. I don't think they're going to get anywhere near better as their advocates say, but they're always going to improve somewhat. And that's just the nature of technology. And there will be, storage things that come along and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is that you can't get there without natural gas. To whatever point you can get, we don't really know how far it can go. I suspect it's less far than what they suggest, and the real answers are, in the future, things like hydrogen and stuff like that, which is, by the way, can be made from natural gas. But in any case, the point is that unless you have something to gives you a baseload generation potential for electricity, then you have nothing. I mean, you can't rely upon solar energy or wind energy or even the combination of the two to do anything in your home or your business unless you have the assurance of natural gas or coal or nuclear behind it, and to give you the ability to have dispatchable energy. You've got to be able to have something available that you can call on at any given moment, any given second, when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, or the wind is blowing less than it should, things like that. So you've got to have that backup, and this is the central point that renewables advocates and green energy people just will not recognize. They just assume that the wind will offset solar, or that there'll be storage solutions down the line, or whatever, and they will not reckon with the fact that you've got to have a baseload generator. And natural gas is the best baseload generator, unless you want to go nuclear. And a lot of people see a lot of problems with that. I personally, I don't necessarily have a problem with it, but it is expensive, very expensive compared to natural gas. And a lot of people are concerned about it from a risk standpoint. So I don't necessarily share that concern, but it's out there, and that's why it's so expensive, because of that perception. So natural gas is still your best bet as a backup option, not just the backup, but as you say, a foundation, as the base load generator, and then use the solar and the wind for the extra, the supplemental.
Tom Shepstone, NaturalGasNow.org is his website. I want to get one last question in because I enjoy speaking with him so much. When it comes to energy's image right now, I do think another one of their issues that they're having, because I think 2020 is going to be the most important year in oil and gas's history, at least in modern history. I think that they're facing what the farmers faced before, which was when the supermarkets came around, pretty soon everybody forgot that the farmers were the ones that were making the food. And I think that the light switch and the circuit breaker has really replaced the energy worker out there, and people just assume that power comes from a switch.
Yeah. Well, here's how I see it similarly, but a little bit differently too, and that is we have increasingly become an urban country, which is the natural state of things. With a growing population, you're going to have a more urban country in certain areas, and as you become more urban, people get separated from the land, and they get separated from how you grow food, how you make lumber, how you build things, how you create energy. They do not appreciate that. And you will find people from New York City who think a tree will only take 10 years to grow, for example, or that you can grow all the food we need from an organic plot in somebody's backyard, or that we can produce the energy we want just by magically saying solar and wind without considering storage. I mean, this is because they know next to nothing about what's involved. I mean, you grew up in I presume in a rural area. You seem to be thoroughly familiar with rural life, and so did I. I grew up on a farm, and so I understand. I know what it means to own land, to grow things, and the risks, the enormous risks involved and all that stuff. And so I have an appreciation for it. But you take somebody who grew up in New York City or in Metro New Jersey or whatever, they haven't got a clue. They really don't know. They don't have the foggiest idea how this stuff is done. So they're vulnerable to being demagogued. That's the essence of the problem as I see it.
All right, give yourself a plug if you got a website or any sort of newsletters, etc.
Yep, so you can just go to NaturalGasNow, one word, .org, NaturalGasNow.org, and you can find out more about me there, and you can read our posts. We generally have 1 to 2 posts. Well, there's 1 post every day except Sunday, and generally there's 2 posts. So there's always something interesting to read, and we include links to things. We include even links to your shows where I've been on them, and we include links to a lot of videos. So there's a lot of information there. I would encourage people to visit, and if they like to support what we do, they can do that there too. So.